does kindness still matter when it costs you everything? On the eve of Thanksgiving, while warm lights flickered behind family windows and the scent of roasted turkey drifted through the neighborhoods of Birmingham, Alabama, one man stood alone in the cold, drowning in unpaid bills, broken dreams, and silence. Not far from the freeway's edge, a family huddled inside a dead car, their children crying from the bitter wind slicing through the metal shell meant to protect them. But the world didn't pause. The city didn't notice, and no one knew that this quiet, overlooked moment would become the beginning of something extraordinary. That night, 38-year-old Malik Thompson, a black auto mechanic and owner of a struggling garage called Thompson Auto Repair, stared at a stack of overdue notices under the dim yellow glow of a desk lamp. His face was tired, worn by months of sleepless nights and empty workdays. Once, this shop had been a symbol of hope, a legacy left by his father, built with grease-stained hands and the grit of working-class pride. Now he was barely breathing, suffocated by a slow economy and the tightening grip of debt. Outside, the wind screamed, the windows rattled in protest, and inside Malik rubbed his temples, knowing he had already let go of one loyal employee and was just weeks away from possibly locking the door for good. He had promised his younger sister Danielle he'd be at Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. Her kids, 10-year-old Amari and 7-year-old Riley, had been waiting all week to see Uncle Malik. Danielle's voice had tried to sound light on the phone earlier, but she heard the exhaustion in his silence. Still, Malik reassured her with a smile she couldn't see. He told her he'd show up by 5, that he'd bring dessert, that everything was fine. But nothing was fine, and he knew it. The following morning, Malik poured himself into work, replacing oil, checking brakes, organizing parts he could barely afford to restock. Holiday seasons had always been slow, but this year was brutal. By 4:30 p.m., with no customers in sight, he slipped on his frayed leather jacket, zipped it against the creeping cold, and stepped out into a sky feathered with early snow. He paused at his truck, picturing the laughter waiting at his sister's table, his niece tugging his sleeve, his nephew begging for stories. For one fleeting second, he allowed himself the luxury of anticipation. Then his phone rang. An unknown number. "Thompson Auto Repair?" he answered. A woman's voice, sharp with panic and threaded with fear, broke through the line. "Please, are you the owner? We're stranded on Highway 65. Our car just died. No one's answering. It's freezing. We've got 2 kids with us." In the background, faint sobs, children crying. Malik froze. He looked down the quiet street, back at his truck, imagined Danielle setting the table, the kids running to the door when he arrived. Then he heard the wind again, not outside but through the phone. The sound of a storm clawing at a car's thin walls, the silence between the woman's words, the helplessness. And he knew he could not walk away. He would not. That moment, without applause, without an audience, would change everything. But he didn't know that yet. He only knew that somewhere out there 2 children were cold, 2 parents were afraid, and the road had swallowed their chance to reach someone they loved, just as it once did to him. That was all it took. Before we dive into the full journey of Malik and the family he helped, a journey of sacrifice, revelation, and transformation, I want to ask something of you. Please, give this story your full attention. Find a quiet space, pour yourself a warm drink, sit down, breathe deep, and allow yourself to feel this. Let the healthcare workers enjoy. Because what began as a simple roadside favor became a life-altering intersection of fate, justice, and the kind of integrity that's easy to overlook, but impossible to forget. Malik Thompson woke before dawn, not because of an alarm clock, but because of the ache in his chest. It wasn't physical, not quite. It was the ache of knowing that something you love is slipping away, day by day, and you're not strong enough to stop it. The light outside was a pale gray, leaking through the blinds of the small apartment above his garage. The cold had crept in overnight, biting at his ankles, even through thick socks. Malik sat up on the edge of his bed, rubbing his face with both hands. In the stillness, he could hear the slow ticking of the old wall clock downstairs in the shop, a sound that usually brought him comfort, but not this morning. Today, he just reminded him of how fast time was running out. He stood, his joints protesting, and moved to the window. Below, the parking lot was empty, dusted with a layer of snow so thin it looked like ash. The faded sign that read Thompson Auto Repair swayed slightly in the wind, the paint on the letters peeling like old skin. It had once been his father's dream. Now it felt like his own slow failure. By 6, he was already downstairs, heater groaning as it tried to push away the cold that seeped through every crack in the walls. He moved through the garage in silence, flipping switches, organizing tools, checking that the few work orders he had for the week were still taped neatly to the clipboard. He knew them by heart. 1 oil change, 1 tire rotation. That was it. Not enough to cover rent, let alone utilities or the loan payments that haunted his mailbox. The aroma of burnt coffee filled the air as the ancient machine sputtered to life. Malik poured himself a cup and walked to the office. The desk was a battlefield. Unpaid invoices, a bank statement with a red final notice stamped across the top, an empty envelope from the electricity company. He sighed, sitting down, steam from the mug curling around his tired face. He opened his ledger, flipping past pages once filled with proud entries, notes in his father's careful handwriting, drawings Malik had made as a teenager when he'd dreamed of building a chain of garages one day. Now the most recent pages were marked by silence, blank spaces where business should have been. The heater kicked again, shaking the room. Outside, the sky was turning silver blue, the sun straining to break through clouds that threatened more snow. He took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, harsh, like everything else lately. Just then, the phone buzzed. "Danielle," he murmured with a faint smile, seeing his sister's name on the screen. "Hey, big brother," her voice came through, warm and soft, like a blanket pulled fresh from the dryer. "You still coming tomorrow? The kids are so excited. Amari made you a card. Riley says he's going to eat all your mac and cheese if you're late." Malik chuckled despite himself, his shoulders easing slightly. "Yeah, I'll be there. 5 o'clock sharp. Tell him to save me a big plate." "You sure you're okay? You sound tired." He leaned back in his chair, glancing again at the mountain of debt on his desk. "Just a long day. I'm good. Don't worry about me." There was a pause. "You know we love you, right?" she said quietly. "It's not the same without you at the table." His voice caught in his throat, but he cleared it quickly. "Yeah, I know. Love you, too." They said goodbye, and he held the phone in his hand a second longer before setting it down. The garage was still, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with ghosts. Not the kind that made doors creak or lights flicker, but the kind that pressed down on your chest when you walked past a photo of your father on the wall. The kind that lived in the oil stains under the lift, where Malik had dropped his first wrench at 14 and gotten his first real scolding. The kind that whispered failure when the phone didn't ring and no cars pulled into the lot. But he had made a promise. To his father, to his family, to himself. So he moved, not because he had hope, but because stopping felt like giving up. By mid-morning, Malik had rotated the tires on a car that didn't really need it, checked the fluids on a truck that wouldn't be picked up until next week, and restocked the vending machine with snacks no one ever bought. He stayed busy. He always stayed busy, as if momentum could mask the sound of something breaking. At noon, he walked to the diner across the street. They knew his name, his order, and lately his tab. He took his sandwich to go, eating it back at the shop in silence. Snow had started to fall again, the flakes slow and fat, sticking to the windshield of the one customer's car still in the lot. By 3, he was sweeping the garage floor. It didn't need it, but he swept anyway. And when that was done, he cleaned the already clean windows, wiped down toolboxes, rearranged wrenches, anything to keep his mind from drifting to numbers that didn't add up. At 4:15, he finally sat down again, this time staring at the picture on the wall behind his desk. It was old, taken 2 decades ago. Malik at 18 grinning beside his father, both of them covered in grease, standing in front of the freshly painted sign that bore their name. His father's arm was around him, proud, hopeful. Malik hadn't felt that hopeful in a long time. But now he had promised he'd be at dinner. So he stood, brushed the dust from his jacket, zipped it up tight, and walked outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The sky had gone slate gray. The street was quiet. He pulled out his keys. And then the phone rang. It wasn't Danielle, not a number he recognized. Thompson Auto Repair, he answered, already half in his truck. Is this the owner? Please, our car just died. Highway 65, we've called everyone. No one's answering. It's freezing. We have 2 little kids with us. Malik's breath caught. In the background, he heard crying. Children. He closed his eyes for half a second, picturing Amari and Riley, safe, warm, waiting for him to walk through the door. He imagined the table, the laughter, the food. He imagined this family, old, afraid, alone. And suddenly, the choice didn't feel like a choice at all. I'm on my way, he said. The sky had turned the color of bruised steel with snow tumbling in thick, wind-whipped spirals as Malik Thompson turned the key in his old pickup truck and shifted it into gear. The heater groaned but offered little warmth. The cold was alive now, moving like a thing with breath and claws, crawling under his collar and biting at his skin. But he didn't flinch. Somewhere out there, a family needed him. The tires skidded slightly as he pulled onto the road. Highway 65 was a stretch of black uncertainty, dusted in white and flanked by forests that loomed like sleeping giants. The world had gone quiet. No cars, no voices. Just snow and wind and the sound of his own breathing. The phone call echoed in his head, the woman's panic, the tears of children in the background. Malik tightened his grip on the wheel, eyes flicking back and forth between the windshield and the barely visible lines on the road. The world had become nothing but a blur of ice and shadow, and yet he drove with a calm that came not from confidence, but conviction. This wasn't a rescue, it was a promise. 15 minutes in, his headlights cut through the growing whiteout and caught the glint of hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. He slowed, easing his truck to the shoulder. There, stranded awkwardly in the narrow lane, was a black SUV. A man stood outside it, waving his arms with a flashlight in one hand. Malik stepped out into the storm, the cold slapping him like a living thing. His boots crunched against the icy pavement as he approached. "Are you Malik?" the man called out, voice hoarse. "Yeah." "You Marcus?" Malik reached out his gloved hand, and the man gripped it tightly. Marcus looked to be in his early 40s, shaved head, solid build, but the lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and worry. "I don't know what happened," Marcus said, gesturing to the vehicle. "One minute we're driving, the next, it just dies. No lights, no sound, nothing." Malik peered into the SUV, where a woman, Lauren presumably, was bundled in a blanket, 2 children pressed against her sides. The girl, maybe 7 or 8, stared back with wide, fearful eyes. The little boy, younger, held a toy car in his hand but clutched it like a shield. "Pop the hood," Malik said, already stepping toward the front. He worked in silence, the snow coating his jacket, settling in his beard. It took only moments to see the issue. The battery was frozen, but more than that, there was a deeper failure in the electrical system. Not something he could fix on the shoulder of a snowy highway. "This is gonna need a tow," he said, closing the hood with a solid thunk. "And you all need to get warm, fast." Lauren's voice cracked as she spoke for the first time. "We're trying to get to Atlanta. My mom, she's in the hospital. They don't know if she'll make it through the night." Something twisted in Malik's chest. He had been here before, not on this road, not in this storm, but in this feeling. Helplessness. Hot withering in the cold. He turned to Marcus. "I'll tow you to my shop, 10 minutes from here. We'll get you inside, warmed up, and I'll work on the car from there." Marcus hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Thank you. Man, thank you." Malik gave no reply, just moved with urgency. The wind howled around him as he secured the chains beneath the SUV. His gloves were soaked through, his fingers numb, but his movements were sharp, precise. And then, an image. As he knelt by the tire, tightening the last hook, he glanced back at the SUV. Inside, through the window blurred with frost, the little girl reached out her tiny hand and traced something onto the glass. A heart. It fogged and vanished instantly, but the sight of it hit Malik harder than the wind ever could. He blinked it away and stood, signaling Marcus. "All right, let's roll." They moved. The SUV bumped forward slowly behind his truck, snow swirling in a frantic dance around them. Malik kept one eye on the road, the other on the rearview mirror. He didn't know why, but something about this family, something in their silence, echoed deep inside him. Back at the garage, he pulled in carefully, guiding the SUV into the warm belly of the shop. The contrast was jarring. Outside, a storm. Inside, the last breath of heat from an aging furnace and the soft hum of overhead lights. Lauren stepped out, her arms still wrapped protectively around the children. She looked like she hadn't exhaled in hours. "Come in," Malik said gently, leading them to the waiting area. It was nothing grand, just a small room with cracked leather chairs and an old coffee pot. But it was warm. She gave a shaky nod. "You don't know what this means to us." "I don't need to," Malik replied. "I've been there." Good. He didn't explain. He just turned, grabbed his tools, and lifted the SUV. Work was focus. Work was survival. But when he glanced over his shoulder and saw the little boy asleep in his mother's arms, the girl clutching a crayon and drawing on a notepad Lauren had pulled from her bag, something in him softened. He bent to the engine and began. The hours that followed moved like melted snow, slow at first, then suddenly gone. Malik worked in silence, sleeves rolled up, grease coating his hands, the chill clinging to the corners of the garage like a stubborn ghost. He ran diagnostic tests, replaced the alternator, and carefully rewired the system. Every step was deliberate. Every motion carried the weight of not just getting the car running, but getting this family to where they needed to be. Outside, the storm intensified. The shop's front windows were now painted with frost. Inside, the room pulsed with a quiet urgency. Marcus sat nearby, on his phone in hushed tones, pacing like a man caught between duty and helplessness. Malik didn't ask questions. He understood that silence. He had lived in it once, years ago when his mother was slipping away, and he'd waited in a cold hospital corridor, praying for just a little more time. Now another family was chasing that same race against time. In the waiting room, Lauren hummed softly to the children. Her voice, though tired, carried warmth. It was the kind of sound that made even cracked walls feel safe. She didn't smile often, but when her daughter handed her a scribbled drawing, a family in front of a house with a heart above it, her eyes softened. Malik heard a soft sniffle. He turned briefly and saw Marcus staring through the glass that separated the waiting area from the garage. Their eyes met. "Is it bad?" Marcus asked. Malik wiped his forehead with a sleeve, leaving a streak of oil across his temple. "It was, but I think we're getting there." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "She's all the family we got left," he said, his voice quiet. "Lauren's mom. She raised her alone. Raised me like a son too. We just need to see her. Just need to make it in time." Malik, that world me. Malik didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just went back to work. And finally, after what felt like both forever and no time at all, the engine came to life. The sound was nothing special to anyone else, just a machine running. But to Malik, to Marcus, to Lorne, it was a heartbeat. Alive, moving, possible. Malik stepped back, the hum of the engine steady behind him. He took a breath, cracked his knuckles, and walked into the waiting room. "Restless. She's ready," he said simply. Lauren looked up first. Her eyes widened and then, to everyone's surprise, filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus stood. "I don't even know what to say, man." "You don't have to," Malik replied. "Get where you need to go." Marcus reached for his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of cash. "How much do I owe you?" Mullet glanced at the register. He thought about the parts. Over $800, 0 cents. The labor, several hours, a full repair, in the middle of a snowstorm, on Thanksgiving. But he didn't hesitate. "Just the cost of parts," he said. "No charge for labor." Marcus blinked. "You serious?" Malik nodded. "Call it a Thanksgiving gift." Lauren's voice cracked. "No one does that anymore." Malik looked her in the eye. "Then maybe more people should." There was a pause. And then, in a moment neither expected, Lauren stepped forward and hugged him. Brief, but real. Her voice was low, trembling. "You don't know what this means." And she was right. He didn't. He wouldn't until later. Marcus handed him the cash for the parts and slipped a small matte-finished card into his hand. "If you ever need anything," he said, "call me." Malik barely looked at it, just tucked it in his pocket. The family gathered their things, bundled the kids and walked to the SUV. As they drove off into the snow, taillights glowing faint in the distance, Malik stood in the doorway, watching until they were gone. He exhaled and smiled, not because he'd saved anyone, but because for one night he hadn't failed. He turned, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked back inside. The snow had barely begun to melt when Malik Thompson returned to work the next morning. The sky was clear, pale as bone, and the cold clung to every surface like frostbite that refused to lift. He stepped into the garage just after sunrise, unlocking the door with stiff fingers and flicking on the fluorescent lights overhead. The hum of electricity greeted him. It was quiet, familiar, but something was different. Malik could feel it. He set down his thermos and hung his jacket near the heater, the warmth barely enough to fight off the chill from the night before. His body ached from hours of labor and the adrenaline that had slowly leaked from his veins after the family had left. But it wasn't just physical. There was a strange energy in the air now. Not anxiety, not fear. Something else. Doubt, maybe. Or perhaps the echo of something unfinished. He reached into his jeans pocket, searching for his shop keys, and his fingers brushed against a rectangle of smooth cardstock. He froze. "It's the business card." He pulled it out slowly, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. It was thick, matte black, embossed silver text. Marcus Bennett. CEO Bennett Motors. Malik stared at it. His thumb ran over the lettering again and again, as if the name might vanish if he stopped touching it. He knew Bennett Motors. Everyone in the industry did. They weren't just a parts supplier. They were giants, corporate powerhouses, manufacturers who set trends and influenced nationwide supply chains. He had worked with their parts for years, installed them in hundreds of cars. And now, he had unknowingly repaired the personal vehicle of the man who ran the entire company. Malik let out a low whistle and leaned against the workbench. "You got to be kidding me," he chuckled, though there wasn't much humor in it. It was disbelief. Awe. A twinge of regret, maybe, that he hadn't known, that he hadn't made more of that moment. But the feeling passed, because deep down he knew the truth. He wouldn't have changed a thing. Not the repair, not the free labor, not the choice to help. Some things just had to be done because they were right. He tucked the card back into his wallet and opened the garage for the day. Hours passed. The usual quiet settled in. No new customers, no miracles, just oil wrenches and the creak of old machines trying to stretch their bones in the cold. By lunchtime, Malik was elbow-deep in the engine of a 2001 pickup, half listening to a radio host ramble about college football when he heard it. Tires on gravel. He looked up. A sleek black SUV rolled into the lot, so clean and polished it looked like it belonged in a showroom. Right behind it, another luxury car, a deep gray sedan with tinted windows. Malik wiped his hands on a rag, his brow furrowed. This wasn't the usual crowd. Not even close. The SUV's door opened, and Marcus Bennett stepped out. This time, he wasn't wearing a heavy winter coat. He wore a tailored suit, the kind that hugged every line with precision. A scarf looped neatly around his neck. He looked like a man who didn't just walk into rooms. He owned them. Behind him, two other men exited the sedan, both dressed in smart business attire. One held a leather folder. The other carried a briefcase. Malik's heart began to beat faster. He tossed the rag aside and stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett," he said, keeping his voice level. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Marcus smiled and reached out to shake his hand. "Good to see you, Malik. I hope you don't mind us dropping by." Malik shook his head firmly. "Not at all. Car okay?" "Running like new, thanks to you." There was a pause. Then Marcus glanced around the garage, at the chipped paint, the outdated equipment, the smell of oil that never quite left the air. "I did a little research after that night," Marcus said. "Asked around about you." Malik arched a brow. "Oh, word is people trust you, say you do honest work, no shortcuts, that you take care of folks, even when it costs you." Malik shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just doing what I was raised to do." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what I'm looking for." He gestured to the two men behind him. "We're expanding Bennett Motors, building a network of certified service centers across the country, not dealerships, real shops, local, trusted, places where people feel safe getting their cars fixed without being upsold or scammed." He paused. "We want this shop to be the first." The words hit Malik like a punch to the chest. "You want this shop?" he repeated. "I want you," Marcus corrected. "I want to invest in you." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "This place has something money can't buy: reputation, community, integrity. That's what I need. That's what I want to build around. Not logos, not polished floors. People." Malik stood still. For a moment he said nothing. And then he did something he hadn't done in weeks. He laughed. A sharp, surprised sound that echoed against the walls. "You're serious?" Marcus smiled. "Very." The man with the briefcase stepped forward, opening it to reveal a folder with printed contracts and architectural plans. Renderings of a remodeled garage, New lifts, new tools, a redesigned waiting area, an employee break room. "We'd fund the renovations," Marcus said. "All of it. You'd stay owner. You'd run it how you see fit, just with the full backing of Bennett Motors behind you." Malik stared at the blueprints, at the image of his garage reborn. He couldn't speak, so he did the only thing that felt real. He reached for the old metal stool beside the workbench and sat down slowly, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Marcus said gently. "Just say yes." Malik looked around his garage. The same stained floor his father had once swept every night, the mismatched chairs in the waiting room, the smell of rubber and steel that had soaked into the walls after years of honest labor. This place wasn't just his livelihood. It was legacy, it was memory, it was family. And now, for the first time in a long time, it had a future. Still, something tugged at him, a cautious voice, a quiet whisper of doubt. "What's the catch?" Malik asked, meeting Marcus's gaze. Marcus shook his head. "No catch, just one condition." He stepped closer. "Keep doing what you've always done. Keep helping people, keep treating every person who walks through that door like they matter. That's all I ask." Malik blinked. He looked down at his hands, still stained with grease, still aching from last night's labor. And he saw something he hadn't in years. Purpose. He stood up, and with no flourish, no hesitation, extended his hand. "Let's do it," he said. Marcus took it, gripping it firm. "You won't regret this." Within 48 hours, everything changed. Contractors arrived with trucks full of materials, painters, electricians, designers. It was like watching someone breathe new life into an old house. Walls were stripped, floors redone, lifts replaced. The waiting room was transformed with soft lighting, new seating, a small children's corner with books and coloring supplies. But the biggest change was Malik himself. He moved differently. Not with arrogance, but with pride, quiet pride. He hired back the mechanic he'd let go, then another, then a third. Within 3 weeks, the garage was fully staffed for the first time in years. And then came the sign. Put up. A brand new steel sign, glossy black with silver lettering. "Power through the pressure. Thompson Auto Care, a Bennett Motors partner." When it went up, Malik stood outside in the snow, staring at it for a long time. And then he did something small, almost invisible, but deeply symbolic. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old laminated photo of his father, the one that had hung above the register for over a decade. He wiped it clean and mounted it to the new wall just beneath the clock, so that no matter how shiny the place became, its heart would never change. 3 weeks after the transformation of Thompson Auto Care, Malik Thompson still found himself waking up before the alarm clock. Old habits die hard. But now, the mornings felt different, not heavy with dread, but alive with momentum. The garage no longer echoed with silence. Instead, it buzzed softly with movement, with conversation, with purpose. By mid-March, word had spread. The shop had gone from a struggling corner repair spot to the talk of the neighborhood. Local news had covered the story, briefly, a feel-good blurb tucked between weather and sports. But for the people of Birmingham, it meant something real, familiar, personal. The old customers came back first, those who'd once scraped together enough to fix a tire or a timing belt. Then came the curious. New faces, drawn by the whisper of something honest, something different. And Malik, he still worked under the hood. He still wiped grease on his jeans and leaned in close to listen to an engine's rhythm like it was speaking to him. Because with new lifts, new lights, new money, his heart had never changed. But one Thursday afternoon, as spring began to tease the edges of the trees, a sound outside the shop made him pause. Not tires, Not footsteps. Her laugh? High, young, unfiltered. He looked out. Standing just beyond the glass door was a boy, small, maybe 5 or 6, with a coat 2 sizes too big and a sheet of paper clutched in his mittened hands. Beside him stood Lauren Bennett. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes carried a peace he hadn't seen before. "Mind if we come in?" she asked, her smile warm. Malik's heart skipped. "Of course," he said, waving them in. The boy stepped forward first and held out the paper. "Made this for you," he said proudly. Malik knelt, took it with both hands. It was a crayon drawing, childlike, messy, perfect. A boxy car, a tall figure with a beard, a big sign that said, "Mr. Malik, the best fixer." Malik laughed, a real, from-the-gut sound. "You got my beard just right." Lauren chuckled, stepping closer. "He's been asking to come see you since that night. We finally had the chance." She looked around. "This place, it's beautiful. Still smells like motor oil, though," Malik teased. "Smells like honesty," she replied. They shared a moment of silence, easy, full. Then Lauren's voice dropped to a softer register. "We made it to Atlanta that night," she said. "Mom held on long enough. She got to see her grandkids, got to say goodbye." Her voice trembled. She passed the next morning. Malik's expression softened. "I'm glad you made it," he said quietly. "Truly." She nodded. "We never got to say thank you properly, so thank you. Not just for the repair, but for being who you are." Malik glanced at the drawing again, then stood and walked to his office. He returned a moment later with a small gold thumbtack and pinned the crayon drawing on the wall, right beside the photo of his father. Lauren's eyes glistened. "He said, my dad," Malik said. "He built this place, taught me everything. That picture's been up there since the beginning, and now your son's picture gets to sit beside it." Lauren blinked rapidly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Malik said. "Some things just belong." Lauren and her son lingered for a while, sipping cocoa Malik had prepared from a dusty old machine he hadn't used in years. The boy sat quietly at the corner table in the waiting area, coloring in a fresh page, humming a quiet tune. Lauren, meanwhile, walked through the shop with slow, reverent steps, taking in the details, framed photos of employees on the wall, motivational quotes, a small shelf labeled "Customer Kindness," filled with little thank you cards and trinkets left behind by strangers who had been helped. She paused in front of one, a simple napkin scrawled with black ink. "You saved my life and you didn't even know it." Her hand touched it gently. Malik noticed. "A kid left that last week," he said. "Didn't say much, just smiled and handed it to me after I'd fixed his car. I didn't think much of it at the time." Lauren's gaze didn't leave the napkin. "I think you fix more than just cars, Malik." He didn't reply, because deep down, he feared she might be right. As the sun began to sink behind the trees, casting long golden bars through the shop's windows, Lauren and her son prepared to leave, but just before they did, she turned back one last time. "Marcus told me about the partnership," she said. "About how this all started with that night." Jean lifted. She walked to the center of the shop and stood still. "You didn't just fix a car," she said. "You changed our entire life. You changed his life." She gestured toward her son, who now looked up and smiled. Malik swallowed, voice low. "I just did what anyone decent would do." Lauren shook her head. "No, Malik, you did what the right kind of person would do, and there aren't enough of those." They left with the door chiming softly behind them. And in the fading light, Malik stood alone in the middle of the shop, surrounded by silence and memory and meaning. He walked over to the drawing, now pinned beside his father's photograph, and stared at it a moment longer. Then, without a word, he turned off the lights, locked the doors, and stepped out into the early evening. But something had shifted. Not just in the spring melted into summer, and with it, the quiet power of what had begun inside Thompson Auto Care continued to ripple outward. Malik Thompson no longer felt like a man surviving a storm. Now he felt like someone building something through it, and not just with wrenches and bolts, but with people. 3 months had passed since the shop's rebirth, and though Malik still worked under the hood most days, he had begun to notice something new, something more than cars. It started with a 17-year-old named Jalen. Jalen had walked in one humid June morning, his shirt soaked through with nervous sweat, holding a crumpled resume and asking if they were hiring. He'd heard about Malik from a friend, the guy who fixed a CEO's car for free. At first, Malik thought he was just another kid looking for summer work. But there was something in the way Jalen talked about engines, like they were poetry. Broken poetry waiting to be translated. Malik gave him a chance. Within 2 weeks, the boy had learned how to diagnose a faulty timing belt by sound alone. Within a month, he was staying late to clean up the bays, even after his shift had ended. And Malik saw it, the spark of purpose in someone who'd been told they'd never matter. One afternoon, as they closed up shop, Malik found Jalen standing in front of the framed photo of his father and the crayon drawing from Lawarn's son. The boy stared for a long time, then asked quietly, "Was he proud of you?" Malik was silent for a moment, then said, "I hope so, but I know I'm proud of what we're doing now." Jalen nodded. "One day, I want to make my mom proud like that." Malik patted his shoulder. "You already are. You just don't see it yet." That moment stayed with Malik for days, and it planted something deeper. That night, after locking the shop, he sat at his desk and stared at a blank page in a notebook. Then, slowly, he began to write. The Thompson Initiative, empowering the next generation of mechanics. He envisioned a program, a foundation, to train underprivileged youth in automotive skills, business ethics, and leadership, a place where knowledge was passed down the way his father had passed it to him. With grease-stained hands and unshakable dignity, he didn't have a marketing team, didn't know how to write grants, but he had a story. And stories, when told truthfully, move mountains. It took only 2 weeks for the idea to take root. Marcus Bennett didn't hesitate. When Malik called to share his vision, Marcus showed up at the shop the next morning, no suit this time, just jeans, a jacket, and his usual sharp eyes. I don't want a sponsorship," Malik said, laying the notebook on the table. "I want a partnership. A real one, not for profit. For legacy." Marcus flipped through the handwritten pages, goals, timelines, outreach plans, scribbled in ink and sweat. Then he looked up. "I'm in," and that was it. The Thompson Initiative was born, funded in full by Bennett Motors and Malik's own savings, run out of the garage, with classroom space added next to the main service bay. By autumn, the first cohort of 8 students began their training. Jalen was the first to enroll. Then came a girl named Nina, who could tear down a carburetor in 30 minutes flat. Then Luis, Trey, Maya, Devin, Keisha, and Malik Jr. Not Malik's son, but a quiet 12-year-old who insisted on being called that after hearing Malik speak at a school assembly. Every morning, the shop echoed not just with impact wrenches, but with laughter, questions, and purpose. Malik taught them everything: how to diagnose a misfire by ear, how to treat customers like human beings, how to carry yourself when no one's watching. He made them memorize one phrase: Skill gets you in the door, integrity keeps you there. One day, as he watched them gather around an engine hoist, arguing over the fastest way to remove a seized pulley, Malik felt something shift in his chest. Not pride, not even joy. Something deeper, like he was witnessing the continuation of something sacred. A legacy made, not of blood, but of belief. That night, long after everyone had gone home, he sat alone in the garage with the lights off. Only the quiet hum of the vending machine kept him company. In his hands was the original business card Marcus had given him, the one he'd almost forgotten he still carried. He turned it over, blank on the back. He smiled. Then, with a pen, he wrote something. "If you're holding this, it means you were never just a customer." Then he taped it next to the napkin that read, "You saved my life." And underneath both he pinned a new sign. This shop doesn't just fix cars, it builds futures. The first Thanksgiving after the launch of the Thompson initiative arrived, with more than just cold air and falling leaves. And it arrived with meaning. At Thompson Auto Care, the garage didn't close that day, not for profit, not for business, but for something far more human. They stayed open for emergencies. Malik Thompson stood at the front of the shop that morning, watching frost creep across the windows, a hot cup of coffee in his hands. Outside, the streets of Birmingham were quiet, touched by that particular stillness only holidays bring. But inside the garage there was movement, not from customers, from purpose. Jalen was the first to show up, no longer a nervous teen but now a confident young man, carrying boxes of blankets they had collected through local donations. "Think we'll get any today?" he asked. Malik nodded slowly. "We always do." And they did. By noon, a young mother and her daughter arrived, car broken down on I-20, heading to visit grandparents. Malik and Nina worked side by side in the cold to get the engine running. By 3 p.m., an elderly veteran's battery failed on his way to the shelter. Malik gave him coffee, checked his tires, and listened as the man shared stories of a war most had forgotten. But what defined that day wasn't just the repairs. It was the way every person walked in with dread and walked out with dignity. They left with full tanks, warm meals, coloring books for the kids, and, more than anything, the quiet shock of being treated with compassion in a place they had expected only transactions. That night, after they cleaned up, Malik stood in the middle of the garage with his staff. Jalen, Nina, Luis, Devon, Maya. Some were new faces. Some were now teachers. All of them had once been lost in one way or another. They stood in a circle, holding cups of cider and laughing about things that had nothing to do with cars. Malik raised his cup. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he said, "but if it looks anything like today, I'm okay with that." There was a moment of silence. Then Nina smiled. "You know what's crazy? A year ago, I thought I'd be working in a diner my whole life. Then I landed here. Now I'm helping someone else get on their feet." She turned to Jalen. "Remember what you told me on my first day?" Jalen grinned. "Don't mess up Malik's tools." Everyone laughed. But then Jalen added something else. "No," I said. "If you don't believe in yourself yet, just borrow our belief until you do." Malik looked at them all, their faces glowing in the overhead light, their jackets smelling faintly of oil and cinnamon. And in that moment he saw it. This wasn't just a team. It was a culture. Kindness wasn't an act here, it was a language. That winter, Thompson Auto Care launched its next phase, Community Repair Days. One Saturday a month, anyone from the neighborhood could come in and get free diagnostics, discounted repairs, or attend classes on car care. They hosted high school students, single moms, retired mechanics looking to teach again, even kids who had no interest in engines, just in feeling safe, seen, and useful. Local news came again, then state press, then But Malik didn't chase headlines. He chased moments. Like the time he walked into the waiting area and saw Amari, his 10-year-old niece, explaining the function of a carburetor to a curious child as if she were already a certified mechanic. Or the night a stranger left a note under the shop door. Last year, I tried to end my life. That night, you fixed my car. You also gave me a cup of soup and asked how my day was. I don't think you knew what you did, but I'm still here because of it. Malik framed that note and hung it next to the napkin, the business card, and the drawing of Mr. Malik, the best fixer. Each artifact was small, but together they were evidence that when kindness becomes consistent, it becomes culture, and when it becomes culture, it becomes unshakable. One early spring morning, Malik arrived at the shop before dawn. Fog clung to the glass, the air was still, and for once, he didn't unlock the door right away. Instead, he walked to the back of the garage, where his father's old toolbox still sat. He opened the top drawer. There, tucked between sockets and screwdrivers, was an envelope he hadn't touched in years. Inside, an old letter his father had written him on the day he inherited the shop. "Boy, you won't always feel strong, but strength isn't loud. It's in the days you show up anyway. Treat people right, fix what you can, and forgive what you can. This shop isn't a business, it's a promise." Malik sat there for a long time. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood, took that letter, and pinned it above the door. Right where every student, every employee, every guest would see it on the way in and out. Because this place wasn't just where cars were fixed. It was where people remembered who they were. The third Thanksgiving since that snowy night arrived with a sky like glass, still, cold, and waiting. At Thompson Auto Care, the lights were already on before sunrise. Malik Thompson stood alone in the center of the garage, hands deep in the pockets of his brown canvas coat, watching his breath fog in the cold air. The sign above the shop door caught the early sunlight, a Bennett Motors partner. But to everyone in this neighborhood, it simply meant one thing. This place doesn't turn you away. Inside, the air smelled like clove spice cider and fresh bread. The mechanic bays were spotless. Tables were set up where cars usually waited, each lined with plates, hot dishes, blankets, and a note that read, "If you're tired, stay. If you're stranded, speak. If you're hungry, eat." For 3 years now, Malik had kept the shop open every Thanksgiving, not for business, but for people who had nowhere else to go. It was quiet at first. Then, like every year, the door creaked open. An old minivan rolled in, coughing smoke. Malik stepped outside as the vehicle sputtered to a stop. A man stepped out, middle-aged, shoulders heavy. 2 kids in the back seat blinked at him, their faces pale from the cold. Malik didn't speak. He just held the door open. "Come on in, you're right on time." But later that afternoon, the shop buzzed. Jalen and Nina moved through the room with practiced ease, offering bowls of soup, checking tires, showing a small boy how to top off windshield fluid. Devin was teaching an impromptu lesson on how to change a flat, using a pumpkin as a prop and making the kids laugh. In one corner, Lamik sat on a stool, working slowly on a busted alternator. But his eyes weren't on the part, they were on the people. And then he saw her. At the edge of the room, near the tool rack, stood Danielle, his younger sister, with Amari and Riley in tow. He hadn't known they were coming. Bill smiled and raised a Tupperware container. "I figured someone forgot dessert." Malik blinked, then laughed. "You always did time an entrance." She stepped forward and hugged him, tight, brief, real. "You started something here," she said, voice low. He shook his head. "I just fixed a car once." Danielle looked around. "No, you rebuilt the world around it." Yes. As dusk settled over Birmingham and the sky burned soft orange behind the shop's windows, Malik stood outside alone again. Across the street, someone had lit a fire pit. Kids ran around with gloves too big for their hands. Music drifted from an open window somewhere, something slow and old and full of longing. Malik rubbed his hands together. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket, the same one he had carried since day one. The business card Marcus Bennett had given him. He opened it, the silver text still sharp. Marcus Bennett, CEO. But on the back, Malik had written in his own hand, "You were never just a customer." He looked at the card, then at the light coming from the shop behind him. Then he did something he hadn't done before. He walked to the bulletin board inside, the one with the napkin note, the coloring page, the newspaper clippings, and he pinned the card there. Next to it, he tacked a small, hand-lettered sign that simply read, "This is what happens when you answer the call." He stepped back, exhaled, and smiled. That night, the last family left just after 8 o'clock. The kids waved. The dad clutched a bag of groceries the team had quietly packed. Malik locked the door behind them, then turned off the garage lights. The soft whir of the coffee pot, still half-hooked, filled the room, and he whispered to the empty air, "Thank you for breaking down that night. Because if you hadn't, I might never have figured out how to stand back up." The first snow of the season came without warning. Thick, silent flakes drifted across Birmingham like ashes from some long-forgotten fire. By morning, the city was blanketed, muffled into stillness. But the light inside Thompson Auto Care burned steady, warm as ever. Malik Thompson stood at the garage's bay door, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug that read, "Fixing cars, mending lives." A gift from Riley years ago. The paint had chipped, but the message stayed. Behind him, the garage buzzed softly. Jalen calibrating the alignment machine, Maya organizing parts, Nina training a new recruit named Trey. On the walls hung photos of past students, framed letters, and that now famous drawing of Mr. Malik, the best fixer. Every square foot of the shop whispered a story. And today, another story was beginning. A young man stepped out of a rideshare vehicle that stopped just outside the shop. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit, shoes that had walked too far, and a nervous energy you could feel from across the street. Malik watched as the man hesitated before approaching the front door. He wasn't here for a repair. He was here for a memory. The bell above the door chimed. "Can I help you?" Malik asked. The man took a deep breath. "My name's Chris," he said. "I don't think you remember me. 3 years ago, I came here on Thanksgiving. My car had broken down. I was with my 2 kids. He stopped, emotions catching his voice. "You didn't just fix the car. You let us sit, eat, breathe." Malik stepped forward, smiled gentle. "I remember. You were heading to your mother's bedside." Chris nodded. "We made it, with minutes to spare." There was a long pause. "She passed that night," Chris said, voice thick now. "But she saw the kids, held them, said goodbye." Malik lowered his gaze, hand gripping the counter. Chris reached into his pocket. "I don't know what this is worth," he said, "but I came today to tell you something." He unfolded a letter. I started a non-profit last year. It's called Bridge Hour. We help families reconnect with dying loved ones, cover last-minute travel, lodging, anything we can. It's small, but it started because of that night." He handed Malik the letter, along with a photo. In it, his kids, smiling, older now, standing beside a van with the Bridge Hour logo printed across it. Malik stared at the image for a long time, and whispered, "You kept it going." Chris shook his head, eyes wet. "No, you started it." Later that evening, After Chris had gone, Malik stood in front of the wall of thanks. He stared at the napkin. It called the framed note. And now, Chris's photo, newly pinned. The wall wasn't pretty. It was uneven, random, real. It was alive. He sat down at his father's old workbench, pulled out a black notebook and scribbled something new. True legacy isn't about how loud your name echoes. It's about the lives that whisper your impact when you're not in the room. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He walked into the back of the shop, pulled out the old cardboard box labeled Dad's Tools Do Not Touch, and opened it. At the very bottom, buried beneath rags and rust, lay a socket wrench with Thompson etched into the side. He held it to the light, and hung it on the wall. A single tool, one that his father had held, now mounted like a compass, pointing every young mechanic who passed through his doors in one direction only. Forward. It happened in a moment no one witnessed. Late one evening, Malik Thompson stood alone in his garage long after the last car had gone. He placed his hand gently on the cold steel of his father's old wrench, now hanging on the wall. No spotlight, no applause, just the low hum of a heater, the smell of old oil, and the quiet sense that something far bigger than a business had been repaired. This was what quiet power looked like. Not survival, but endurance. Not rescue, but restoration. From that one choice 3 years ago, when Malik helped a stranger on a cold highway, grew a movement, a place where broken machines and broken spirits could be made whole again. A shop that answered racism not with anger, but with consistency, compassion, competence. A legacy rebuilt without asking for permission. And Malik knew it wasn't over. There would be more people stranded on roads invisible to most. And Thompson Auto Care would still be there, waiting, with the light on. The message, what this story teaches us all. Sometimes the most powerful things we ever do are the ones we do when no one is watching. Malik never sought recognition. He didn't wait for a camera or a reward before extending his hand. He simply saw someone in need and answered. And in doing so, he left behind something more lasting than steel or profit. He left behind trust. In a world where prejudice often shouts louder than principle, Malik showed us another way, not through grand speeches but through daily acts of quiet dignity. He reminded us that decency doesn't have to be dramatic, and that healing doesn't always announce itself. To those of you watching, especially if you've lived long enough to see the world grow louder, faster, and sometimes colder, I offer this truth. We still have the power to change it, one quiet choice at a time. If this story moves you, please consider subscribing to Unheard Racist Stories. Share it with someone who may need to hear it. Help us preserve these quiet truths, and in doing so, shape a more just, more human world. With gratitude. Until next time, continue the journey with us on Unheard Racist Stories.